Welcome to another episode When Black Men Talk. It's done in Elliot's Loft. Come on in, spend a little time. I'm Mark Elliott, your host. From time to time in life, there's a time when a man meets woman or a woman meets man, and we call it dating. They start on from that point on. I remember back in the day, the old school term we used to be courting. You don't hear that word thrown around too much, but dating is tend to be the focus now when a woman or a man comes together and decide to explore meeting each other. Well, I'm fortunate today in the episode of When Black Men Talk to have an individual that's helped improve dating success. She's a dating expert. Over 30 years, she's been one of the top dating coaches. Her work has granted her an opportunity to be on Oprah, featured on magazines like Forbes, Wall Street Journal, People's, and many others. I'm speaking of Andrea McGinty. Welcome. How are you?
I'm great, Mark. It's nice to be here.
Oh, good to have you here. When I was doing a little research, I had to go back and do my homework. I noticed over the years you have basically arranged over 2 million dates, resulting in many marriages. That's a lot. Very impressive.
Well, that happens when it's a 32-year career. I never set out for this to be my career, but things happen, and I've been doing it for 32 years, and I still love it. I still, get really excited when people, get engaged or meet their soulmate. So I have a very fun job.
Nice. Let's go back because it sounds like it's not something you chose, maybe something you kind of fell into. Let's go back to maybe a life event that basically helped you become the dating expert that you are.
Sure. It's kind of like, how Harry Potter in the opening book, everyone sits with the hat and then the hat puts you in whatever house you belong in. I don't know if you read Harry Potter. It's sort of like that. This career chose me. I did not choose it. But I got lucky. So yeah, what happened to me was I was in my early 20s and I was getting married. And 2 days before the wedding, he called it off. And I was living in Chicago, like I said, early 20s. Oh, and by the way, it's 1990. So
Ooh,
there's no Google, there's no online dating, there's, just nothing. So, once I got over crying and, feeling sorry for myself, which, lasted a couple of weeks, I thought, well, a couple of things to back up to. I was always good at fixing my friends up. Like two of my college roommates, I fixed them up. And they're still married to this day. And I think it was like just something natural that I like to do. I did it in high school too. And now I drive my kids crazy because they're three kids in their 20s and one we'll go to the movies or we'll be out somewhere and I'll look at two people and I'll be like, you know what? I just don't see it. They don't go together. Or, you know, those two look like a really good couple. So I've got some kind of gene that I guess is like matchmaking or, helping people. So anyway, all right, back to getting dumped. I get dumped at the altar. And I mean, there's no better way to say it. And, I'm the oldest of six kids, and already, like, right after that, a couple of my siblings, they start getting married, and, I'm like, ugh. And one day I get a call from an executive recruiter and she's telling me about two possible opportunities career wise, and I'm thinking, geez, I wish she was calling me with two men instead of two job. And that's when I got the thought, okay, what if there was a place that you could go to where you basically went in, talked to somebody, told them what you were looking for, they got to see you, and uh, and then, they called you with men that they thought were appropriate. Because at this point, my friends are fixing me up on dates. And, I don't know what they're thinking. Well, I know what they're thinking. He's single, she's single. Maybe they'll like each other, which, good, not a really high probability there. And So I came up with the idea. It was called It's Just Lunch, and it still exists actually. And it's where I found that from myself dating that, lunch or a drink after work were the way to go. It wasn't like hours long. There wasn't like that awkward, goodnight kiss or anything like that. You can get in and out fast. So I started in Chicago, and if we just kind of fast forward 20 years, now I have 110 locations worldwide. And it's doing great. And I just loved, um, initially in the early years, having the client contact and meeting people and fixing them up. And part of it, I think part of the draw was I didn't work with, just one sort of person. It's not like I'm a lawyer or an accountant, and all I did was work with, with bankers and lawyers and accountants. It was like every walk of life. And I learned the most interesting things about people. And plus, since I was asking questions, since I was, fixing them up on dates, I needed to know a lot about their personal life. So I guess innately, I'm a little bit nosy too. And that definitely helps with my work because I can really ask the questions, about what are you really looking for? Or, and more often than not, people know what they're not looking for, which is just as helpful to me. So that's how I got into, this whole thing, and it just kept growing and growing. And yeah, and then in 2010, now we've got the advent of online dating, and that started in the late 90s. And it was still in like the year 2000-ish. It was a mess. It was just like a chaotic mess. There were the scammers, and there were these dating sites that just didn't know what they were doing. And people had problems with credibility and verification and privacy issues. But I started to see by 2010 that there was huge potential with online dating if people knew what they were doing with it. And uh, again, I kind of fell into this because in a 10-day time period in 2010, I got two offers for the company, for It's Just Lunch. And one was from a private equity group, and one was from Match.com. And I ended up selling to the private equity firm because I really saw the writing on the wall that, wow, if people knew what to do with internet dating, I could do such a good job for them. Because here there are, thousands of people online compared to, a single It's Just Lunch office in New York or Connecticut or Boston, that maybe has 500 members. So that's how I started my second business, 33,000 Dates.
Wow. It's amazing to think that he, 2 days before the wedding, he chose to cancel, and what's come from it. Most people that lived through that would have went into a hole, went into a cave, basically. They never stuck their head outside. You just kind of fell to pieces. And you look what you have done. Look what you turn it into. I mean, something for yourself and basically benefiting others. Man, that's truly amazing. When I came across that, I was like, wow, because it didn't seem like you sat around wallow in the mire in your pain. And I'm sure at some point he's looked at you and go, I made a big mistake. I made a huge mistake. I'm sure.
You know what? I hope so. But you know what? When I think back on it now, we would probably be divorced anyway. Your 20s, a lot of times, especially early 20s, you don't really know what you want yet. It's like, the later 20s, early 30s, when people kind of start to know, what's more important to them, and their careers are kind of, getting on track. But at the same time, Mark, I wallowed for 2 weeks. And then I said, okay, I've got to stop it. It's, it's over. That's never coming back. And I had this idea, and I just thought I just thought it was a great idea. And I sat down and I wrote a business plan. And again, I hate to keep saying 1990, but there weren't these like books on Amazon that you could buy or download that were like, a template for a business plan. And I borrowed a friend of mine's business plan, who he started a restaurant chain called Brios. And he gave me his business plan, and I used that to write mine. And then I showed it to my brother, who's a year younger and I'm very close to. And he's funny because he's like a CFO type. And he looked at it and he said, "You're crazy. This will never work. This will never, ever work." And after that, and it's something I tell my kids too. If you think you've got a really good idea, you've got to either keep it to yourself or stay away from those naysayers, because they can really be discouraging. I mean, my mom was totally embarrassed about what I was doing.
Hmm.
She's like, "Oh, the family parties, big family. And what's Andrea doing? Oh, she's a dating service. Oh, all the other kids are doing, other stuff that's,
Oh
more
my.
mainstream." So
Wow.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
little did your mother know that you was going to turn into the godmother of matchmaking, bringing men and women together. Now, I look at men, I look at women, and we both come from different atmospheres. For the most part, men are more logical, women tend to be more emotional. Is it hard to bring them together?
No, you made a good point right there, because what you said is absolutely true. So, people who say the sexes are identical, that's just not true. Because women are more emotional. Men do go about this in a more logical, strategic way. Sometimes I find men are easier to work with, because what I'm doing now is, showing people how to go through the steps to be super successful with online dating and not waste time. And men tend to listen to me, and they're just like, "Okay, I do this first, then this, then this, then this, got it." They're so, they understand the steps. The women will be more like, "But what if he doesn't offer to pay on the date?" Or what if he dated one of my friends? Or what if like they come up with all these, it's very, and then there can be a lot of hurt feelings too, because I mean, the one thing you have to remember about online dating: 1 out of 5 people that you message is going to message you back. So you somewhat need a thick skin doing this, and realizing, hey, these are just the odds, and this is just the way it's going to be. The men can take it, and the women, a lot of times, when they've texted, through a dating app, 3 men, and none of them get back to them. They're like, "What's wrong with me? Why doesn't anyone like me?" And I'm like, "That's just 3 men. Who cares? We still have thousands out there, to take a look at." So you're right about it. They go about it, different ways, and it's really important, and that's why, my book that came out in January this year, I think, is doing so well, because it takes everybody step by step through the dating process, and makes it, I hate to say this, but more business-like and more strategic. Because you like to think about it, or women like to think about it as romantic, and sort of the meet cutes at, Whole Foods. Hey, that doesn't happen. Those organic meetings, they just don't happen anymore. I mean, it might have happened to us, in our early 20s, when we were, I don't know, in college, or, first couple years of our career, or whatever. But now, online is where all the action is. And last year, 1 out of 3 couples got married because of online dating. So people are using this.
Wow, it's interesting because I was listening to you were saying about the women. It sounds like that they have that lifetime effect about it. But and if one out of three are getting married, it kind of basically answers the question I was going to ask because I wonder, are people approaching online dating with bad expectations or their expectations are too high? But if one out of three are ending in marriages, no, not at all.
Well, okay. Yeah, to your point right there, expectations, I mean, that's one of the things that I really do is manage people's expectations because, as I'm walking them through the process and doing weekly coaching calls with them and helping them, pick out the right man or the right woman to message, people can get really crazy. And I'll give you an example. Last week, I was talking to a woman in Dallas, and I said, okay, so, catch me up. What's going on? How many dates have you gone on in the last week? And she said, oh my gosh, there's this one man, John. It's going great. We talked on the phone for like an hour last week on Thursday. And then Friday, we talked even longer. And I'm like, yeah, okay, okay, but let's get to the date. How did it go? And she goes, oh, we haven't had a date yet. Um, we're we're still talking on the phone, and you know what? I've told like three of my girlfriends, this is it. I met him. This is the one I'm going to marry. And I'm like, oh no, no. A phone call is not a date. A video chat is not a date. You've got to meet in person. So expectations. Let's talk about that for a second. So when you're doing this, I tell everybody going out on dates, I want you to have zero expectations. And that doesn't mean negative expectations. And that doesn't mean, high expectations. Because the only thing that's going to happen with high expectations, the date is never going to match that. And if you're going out with a negative attitude, well, you just have a bad attitude and you need to like, change your mindset. So going into it with no expectation except, okay, I'm going to meet a new person. This is information gathering. And the only decision I'm making here is do I want to go out with him or her on a second date? That's the only decision that you're making at the end of the day, nothing else. So, yeah, expectations. I'm constantly working with people on that.
Yeah, I can understand that because what I've noticed over the years is that the first meeting, a lot of times people are evaluating so harshly to where is this person a husband? Are they a wife? And they're spending more time on the first encounter, really looking too deeply. And I think that's part of the reason why dating has been frustrated for a lot of people because they put so much into one time meeting someone and the build up and all that goes into it. But you have a quiz that basically help people compare that help them set up the stage in a sense where they can find people more compatible. And I noticed that was placed on your website.
Yes, that quiz is really good, and go to my website and take the quiz. It's free, and you're going to get a score back, and it's at 33,000dates.com, 33000dates.com. And it goes over 16 questions. And what it's really rating you against are people over my career that have had a high level of success. Success meaning it can mean a lot of different things. It could mean, found that long-term partner, found that exclusive relationship, got married, living together. It can mean a lot of different things. But take that quiz because it's going to help temper your expectations, and you might be really surprised by how you score. One of the questions on there is w- uh and women answer this, and I find this very, very interesting, that once you're online and everything's up there, your photos, your bio, we're rocking and rolling online, we've got the right site. um, what are you doing? Are you reaching out to men and sending them um, really unique, short and sweet messages? Or are you just sitting there? Or are you just sending them, a wink or a smile, or a flower or something like that? And then women, and this is like shocking to me, women in, their 40s, 30s, 50s, they'll say, "Oh no, I'm online. I think he should pursue me." And I'm like, "Why? Why should he pursue you? We're not living in the 1950s." Men like when women reach out to them with a message because let's face it, self-confidence is sexy, right?
Very. Yeah. It's interesting because that's very important there. A lot of times between the two sexes, they forget that men like to feel certain things as well. We like to feel wanted, desired, and needed. And a lot of times society has placed it in their minds that we must do all the pursuing, the chasing, the hunting. And that's not necessarily where a lot of men are these days. They basically wants to feel like there's an interest. And a lot of times too, a lot of times for men, we don't want to pursue and knock on a door that's not going to open. So sometimes men will sit back and just kind of, we might peek a little bit, but not make the move because we want to see some sign that you have possible interest.
Exactly. Exactly. That's why there's some really good sites for men where you'll know right away if the woman is interested. And I don't find the microsites to be necessarily the good sites. Some of the I mean there's 1,400 dating apps and sites out there. And a site like a Bumble can be super good for men because it tends to be about 75 to 80% women on the site. And also, what Bumble makes the women do is reach out first. So it makes it a lot easier for you guys because why should you have to re- reach out first? And then we go to different, like I was saying, microsites, and one would be like Black People Meet, and that's a site I tell people don't use it because the numbers are so low in terms of men and women, and some of my African American clients, they want to meet somebody who's African American. Yeah, sure, got it. But the mainstream sites are going to have like every race and religion imaginable. So you want to go with the big sites, and you want to go with, since I feel like I'm probably talking to a male centric audience here, you want to go on a site that is very female centric, where there's a lot of women.
Yeah. You said earlier when you did just, I think it was just launch or just lunch in a sense. And I'm wondering, I love that idea. I think it's great because a lot of times a big date brings a lot of expectations. And of course, most of the time when there's a big date, the male is kind of footing the bill. But I've noticed over the years, when I've heard men say this, when they suggest let's just get in for coffee, a lot of times her reaction to it is not welcoming. They kind of sense that the date should be more, but I love that fact to where it's a small gathering, getting together for the most part, and I think too, you kind of go in and you're not basically on nerves in a sense. So you should be more relaxed, and you kind of be able to learn someone a little easier. I love the idea. That idea, I think, was great.
Yeah, okay. So, let's talk about those first meetings because um I'm not a fan of coffee dates because coffee dates to me are, well, first of all, if you're going to like a mainstream coffee place like Starbucks, and believe me, I've eavesdropped on plenty of first dates in Starbucks. But it's crowded, and women are showing up, after yoga in their Lululemons, and the guys are probably pretty casual too. And I always feel like it's a little bit of a cop out date because in 20 minutes you could be out of there. Um, give these people a chance. Give people an hour. So a lunch date, an hour. You have to eat lunch anyway. Uh, a drink date. I don't recommend dinner because that's way too long. But meeting for drinks like on a Saturday afternoon at 4. That does not mean a Saturday night date, right? that means a drink at Saturday, Saturday afternoon. And then you both have other things to do afterwards. And then people tend to take these a little more seriously, dress a little bit nicer than, their yoga clothes or their workout clothes. And it feels more like a date versus those coffee dates. And you can still keep it super casual. It's a drink. It's a drink. That's it. And at the end of the hour, you're going to meet friends for dinner, or you're going to pick up one of your kids, or you've got something else to do. So it's not putting pressure, on the time.
Hmm. Now you have vast experience and knowledge. I'm wondering, and it's a great benefit. It really is. What are some of the hurdles that people are navigating when it comes to online dating?
I think number one is just getting over that they're going to do online dating. Like, okay, online dating's for losers. But that stigma has pretty much been eradicated. I mean, the 20 and 30 something crowd, they think nothing of posting their photos and getting online. Now, when we're working with like the later 40s and 50s, where this might be a second act type of thing, they were married before or in a long relationship, they can be nervous about it, and they also have more. I don't like to call it baggage. I like to call it life experience that. Uh, they can be nervous, like, do I still have it? I used to be able to flirt. I used to be able to talk to people. I've been married for 15 years. I just got divorced. Do I still know how to do this? So that's self-confidence right there. And so I always say the best way to have self-confidence dating is practice. And with my clients, I want them all in the first 2 weeks to go on 4 dates, because by the third date, they're like, oh, this is easy. I remember this. I can still talk. He found me attractive, or I found her attractive and she seemed to like the conversation and she wants to go on a second date with me. So I think that's one of the big hurdles. The other place people get stuck, and this is where they really get stuck and they want to quit online dating. I mentioned earlier there's 1,400 dating apps and platforms out there. If you pick the wrong one, you're sunk. And what I mean by that is you pick the wrong site and it's totally wrong for you, because as a man, it's mostly men on the site, or it's not the age group you're looking for. Let's say you're a 40-year-old man and all of a sudden all the women are like 50 and 60. You're in the wrong place and you're going to want to quit really, really, fast. And that's a problem that the dating apps and sites have, is with retention, with people not knowing how to choose that right site. And when I'm working with clients, I have access to, well, I pay for access to data that comes from big research firms like Pew and Statista. So I'm able to, like for you, Mark, I'd be able to drill down where you live in Connecticut, what you're looking for, the demographic, and be able to say, okay, these three sites are going to be the strongest for you. And so now at least we know we've got you on the right site. The other big hurdle for people is messaging. They send a message, and I don't know how to say this. Okay, they're just really stupid messages. Men will send messages like, "Hi, beautiful." I'm like, really? Hi, beautiful? That's your message? um or it'll be like maybe a two-liner like, how's your weekend going, doing anything special for the 4th of July? We know that that's just like a cut and paste. He's sending the same message to everybody because there's nothing personalized about it. There's nothing that says, hey, I looked at your photos and I saw a really cool photo of you, scuba diving, where you mentioned something about that, or they mentioned something about, um, they love to cook and eggplant parmesans, their thing. A good response back to something like that is, I love Italian. What else would you make for me on a first date? I mean, being a little flirty and being more specific so people don't know how to message. Or they go on and on with messages where they're like exchanging messages, and now we're pen pals. And what's interesting is Stanford has an ongoing study that they've been doing for 22 years. And what it says is, from the time you first reach out to somebody online to the time that you meet them in person, if more than 5 days have passed, the chance of the date actually happening drops by 95%.
Hmm.
So what I'm saying is, this game moves fast. So you see somebody, you don't say to yourself, I'm going to think about her. You say instead, you've got a strategy. Maybe you've read my book. You've got a way that you're logically doing this. And I say, to the guys, rate the woman in your head. So go 1 to 10. How many tens are there going to be? Not a lot. A lot of sevens and eights, probably. And then a lot, three or four, forget that. So I tell them, anybody who's above a five, send them a message, because all that is, it doesn't mean you have to go on the date, but you're going to get some more information about them and see what kind of personality they have, when they message back. And yeah, so don't just say, "Oh, I'm going to save that person till later. I'm going to save that person," because then you're really not doing anything online. So one of two things: they're below a five, delete them. Above a five, send a 2 or 3 sentence message to them. And this isn't rocket science. Just think of something interesting to say about their profile and shoot it off to them. Don't think too hard.
Hmm. Surprisingly, I thought about this when I was putting this together. There's been an increase in divorced couples in their 50s and their 60s. And I would think that some of those might be reluctant to basically date again or even try to find love again. What would you say to people that are finding themselves at that stage in life and finding themselves getting divorced?
Well, you know what? It's probably something they never thought about when they walked down the aisle, in their 20s or 30s, that, oh, hey, I can't wait to do this again in 25 years. Um, they're, they are nervous. But that is the biggest growth area with online dating apps, is that 50 and 60-year-old crowd. We call them like the second actors, that they're second acts, probably have kids. Kids are probably away at school or away at college. Probably not too many kids living at home. Uh, and they're the ones that they really need the confidence to date again, because they've been with the same person, for so long. Now, everyone who signs up for my service for me to be their consultant, before I take them as a client, I do a 15-minute pre-screening call with them, because I just want to make sure, are they ready to date? And that's one of the in my book, I have 15 worksheets for people to fill out. And the very first one is, where's your head at? And so, for somebody who's, let's say, 55, I'm always like, okay, fill out that first worksheet and see how you come out, because it asks questions like, where's my head at? Can I go on a first date without, um, you know, venting about my ex-husband, or the custody battle, or the financial end of the deal? Um, or, hey, there's people in their 40s and 50s who are even widowed young. Are they over, not that you're ever over it, but are they able to go on dates and not be just talking about their, their deceased spouse, and putting them on a big pedestal that it's going to be impossible for, anyone else to, ever, match. So that's the first part. It's like, where's your head at? Can you do that? So that's super important.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, because they might feel that they're ready to move on, and mentally it may not be. That brings me to another point that I wanted to kind of roll into because for sometimes we have bad experiences dating. It could be a bad marriage and stuff of that nature, and we're reluctant to try to move on again and try love again. And when I hear 1 out of 3 of some that are online dating are getting married, that's a beautiful stat. But what does it say to someone that feels, you know what, love is just not in the cards for me?
It just says to me, they don't have all the information, and they they did not grow up with the technology, our kids that are maybe teenagers or in their 20s grew up with, where this was like the natural way, like doing a lot of social media and stuff like that. They're just not used to it. And they still, there's that stigma of, I'll be a loser if I go online, or, you know, or this is the other thing they say, all the good men are married. I'm like, no, they're not. No, they're not. Or, men will say to me the same thing. All the good women are taken. No, they're not. So it's kind of getting over that mindset, and being a little bit open about, dating, and doing some research, and sometimes, people need therapy too, after a particularly, tough divorce. And if people call me and they tell me, that they're in therapy, the first thing I ask them is, did you tell your therapist you were calling me? And if they say, yes, my therapist thinks it's a great idea, and I think, oh, okay, I can take them as a client. If they say, yeah, I told my therapist, or I didn't tell my therapist, they don't think I'm ready to date. They think I have some healing and grieving and stuff to go through still. I won't take them as a client because I know they're not ready yet. Um, and one thing you really have to avoid too is, your single friends that are telling you, it's a war zone out there dating. It's awful, because you know what? Nobody likes online dating until they meet someone. And then they're like, "Oh my gosh, online dating was the best thing in the world." Initially they they were like, anti, online.
Hmm. I'm listening, and I want to go back to something because you said it took you 2 weeks when he decided to cancel. That's a short period of time. That's amazing. I like that though. I like it because some people it took them years to basically move on from that. So I'm wondering for you, after the 2 weeks of that, how did you find love?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, the younger you are, the easier it is to get over, right? At 22, it's way different than, 55, when maybe you've been married 24 years. So, okay, I'll tell you, I met my first husband I met him through, It's Just Lunch. And we were married for 24 years. And I was lucky that it was a pretty amicable split. But given what I do, every day, was I ready to start dating right after we broke up and got divorced? No, it took me 4 years, in between. And part of my reasoning there was, having 3 kids that were like preteen or teenagers, not the best look for their mom, taking the focus off them at that weird time of their life. It's not like they were 2 and 3 years old, they were, 12. 14 and 16, very vulnerable ages. And so when my youngest went off to school, I, I decided I'm ready. It was just like one day I woke up and I said, I'm ready. Sat down, wrote my bio, which I don't recommend people do. I write bios for people all day long. So I kind of know what I'm doing. And my first week, I was a little crazy, and I don't recommend this either. This is another mistake. My first week online, I went on 5 first dates, and I did lunch, and I did them all at the same place, to the point where, like, by the third date, the hostess said to me, "Oh, Andrew, your date's at the bar outside." And I'm like, "Oh," and he looks good. And, I would kind of laugh as I went outside. But, by the end of that week, I was absolutely exhausted. I didn't remember what person I talked about what with. But I think the reassuring thing to me was, while there wasn't chemistry, there was a little bit of chemistry with one that I ended up going on 3 dates with, but the other four, there was not chemistry. However, I liked them. Like, nobody was weird. Nobody was, um, somebody that you'd be, scared of or anything. But it gave me back my confidence too, that, hey, I can talk and smile and laugh and, um, hold a good conversation. And then about a month later, I met my now husband. So that was my sixth date online. And we met for lunch, and he was I walked up to the table and I thought, oh, he is so cute. And he was kind of reserved, like that boss. You live in Connecticut, like that East Coast Boston reserved. He was kind of like that, and I'm not like that at all. And I liked him right away. And so we got married 2 years ago in Italy.
Hmm. Okay, congratulations.
Thank
Looking
you.
at looking at dating too, you hit two words I want to kind of focus on a little bit because sometimes they work in unison and sometimes they're total opposite. Chemistry and love. And when someone is approaching online dating, should they look for a combination or do they float more towards chemistry or float more towards love?
Huh. Interesting question. So here's the deal with that. So we're not 18 anymore, where, like, our hormones are crazy, right? And there's initial attraction, and, we can't wait to make out at the end of the date, right? So it's a little bit different, I would say. So um, I think the most important three things people need in a relationship for it to work, is going to be chemistry, um, good communication, and common values. I think those three things are necessary, for a good long-term relationship. So, when I talked about managing expectations earlier, I don't want them going in thinking about love. Um, However, I get people call me after, their dates, and we talk about it, and, I'll get feedback like, she was really interesting and she has a great sense of humor. I'm just not sure if I'm attracted to her. And my answer to that is, once again, we're 45 now, or however old we are. We're not, 18. My answer to that is, when you're in doubt, go out again. And it's very funny how, by the second or third date, the same guy will be saying to me, you know what, she's really cute, really cute. When he didn't say that, after the first date, he thought there wasn't the chemistry. On the other hand, if after 3 dates there's no chemistry, it, it's time to, they're going to be a friend, and we're not out there looking for friends, right? We all have enough friends. So, that's where, you kind of cut bait and, move on. So, you do have to have that chemistry component.
Go back and stress those 3 points again. Love, love. Can't remember exactly what they were, so I want to hear it again myself. But I think they're very. I feel they're very important. And actually, you didn't even
Yeah.
say the word love, so I'm sorry.
No, no, I
Mhm.
didn't. I said chemistry, common values, and communication skills. Common values is what's going to make it really, really lasting. Because if your value system's, way different, or, you know, um, hey, I'm Catholic and I married somebody Jewish, and he's really Jewish and into going to temple, and I'm really into going to the Catholic Church. At some point, that's tough to navigate, in a relationship. Now, not that it sometimes can't, work, but those common values, that's just kind of an example. um Another common value would be, family oriented. If somebody's family oriented, and I'll give you an example myself. My ex-husband, not family oriented at all. um with his family, wasn't close. Really nice family, but could care less. And that was something, like, I really didn't want to teach my kids, because that just, I went, that's one of my values, so it's not his. So, okay, common values, chemistry. Yeah, you got to have that chemistry. You've got to be attracted to that person, because you know what, even if we're 65, most people still want intimacy. So are we still having sex at 65? We are. So you need to be attracted to that person. So that's where the chemistry part comes in. And then the communication. Can you talk about things? Can you talk about what you want and what you need? And listen to them, and what they want and what they need. I think, you could add a lot of other things in there, like, trust is really important. But for me, trust kind of comes under, common values. That you're not going to cheat on somebody, that you have the same type of value system. So I really look at those three C's as being very, very important.
No, they are. It's interesting because I think common values is the major one, realistically. And a lot of times we don't even talk about it. We don't. We spend more time featuring the heart, the chemistry and the attraction, but we don't really pay attention to common values. A lot of times during dating in general, it's not something that's in the forefront of the mind, and we don't approach it as something that's really important. I mean, we feel like we love the person, they're not going to cheat on us for the most part, and we find them adorable. That's enough to basically make it a lifetime. But realistically, no, I think common values knocks it out of the park. You spoke of your book. I want to spend some time on your book, the second acts. Tell us more about that.
Okay, yeah. So my book came out in January of this year, January 2025. And it's called Second Acts: Winning Strategies for Dating Over 50. And I don't know, people in their 30s and 40s have been buying it too. But I basically kind of downloaded all my knowledge from, 32 years of doing this. And it's not like a lot of fluff or psychobabble and stuff. It's very goal oriented and strategic, and I look at it very much from a business perspective of, how you're going to get on with your life, especially in when you're in the second act, syndrome. So you've already, been married, or you're widowed, or you're out of a long-term relationship, and it gives you 166 concrete strategies. But I think what I like the most about the book is it has 15 worksheets in the book. And with each worksheet, there's also a QR code where I coach you through that worksheet, like how to fill it out. So it might be like how to write your dating profile, or what's your brand? What's your brand going to be online? I mean, that sounds like so weird, but we have a brand. If we're on Instagram or we're on Facebook or TikTok or whatever, we do have a brand. And the same thing, you have to think about what's my brand with online dating? How am I portraying myself? And it's a worksheet to fill out. And then there's another worksheet about your friends, and asking five of your friends by text, not by phone, and they can't use words like fun, nice, sweet, like those words like are overused, but they have to give five adjectives that really describe you. And it really helps people in terms of when they're writing their profile, because it's hard to write about yourself. That's why they hire me. Um, but it is hard to write about yourself. So you're getting stuff like that, and then the very last worksheet in the book is writing a personal a business plan for your personal life. And again, people like roll their eyes at me and they're like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, you're doing this, like, and because you're going to think about this like a business. Okay, what are my barriers to entry? What's stopping me from doing this? How am I going to market myself? How am I going to pick the right site? It's going to take you through all those things to think about. And, how much time am I going to spend on this? And I don't want anyone spending hours on online dating each week. That's one of the mistakes people make, and I talk about that a lot in my book. You know, Online dating, you shouldn't be spending more than 3 30-minute periods a week online where you're actively searching out women or men and reaching out to them. So my book's very much of it. I mean, it's like 400 pages, but it's a super fast read because it's really taking you from like A through Z on how to get you ready for dating, and then how to deal with stuff like, hey, yeah, there's going to be rejection. You're going to go on 2 dates with a woman, and then all of a sudden, she goes. She ghosts you. What are you going to do about that? Well, you're going to move on because there's nothing you can do about it. And you can't sit around at home and wonder why. Move on to the next one. So, I talk about that, and so I'm pretty direct in the book, but at the same time, I'm graciously direct. I want people to find success, and over 67% of my clients end up in long-term relationships. So, it's working. I want to get to 100%. I never will, but it's working so far.
Well, over 2 million dates and a lot of marriages. I would say it's highly working. Let people know how they can reach you, your website, and how they can pick up the book because I think it's a purchase that should be purchased. Let's give them that information, please.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So you can get the book anywhere. I would say Amazon has the best price. It's Second Acts for winning strategies for dating over 50. And don't buy the Kindle thing. My publisher made me do it on Kindle too, but don't, because you really need the book and you need the worksheets. Buy the paperback or the hard copy, whichever one you want. But you can get that on Amazon. And then to reach me, if you wanted to do a 15-minute call with me to see, if I could help you, or you want to take the dating quiz, just go to 33000dates.com, and right on the homepage is the dating quiz, and then there's also a way to contact me as well. And if you'd like to do a 15-minute call with me and see if we're a good fit together and I can help, that's the best way to get a hold of me. And then I've got tons of blogs and YouTube videos too that are short and sweet, like 2 minute, how to dress for a date, what to talk about, where to go for a first date. So I've got a lot of videos too on my site and on YouTube as well.
Andrea McGinty. I want to do this before we get out of here. I want you to go back to your Chicago days because that entrepreneurial spirit you had, your entrepreneurial days, oh, I love it. And to me, it needs to be told in detail. So if you don't mind, let's go back there to, when you was in your 20s back. I don't want to say what year it was, but let's go back there and bring us through that if you don't mind.
And go back to like how I started.
Absolutely. How you started. I mean, we understand what happened about the wedding, but when you started your business and how things kind of grew and flourished from there.
Oh yeah, I was worried like the first 3 years every day that I was going to go bankrupt. So it's not like it was like a fairy tale. It was a lot of hard work, and it was just like there's no way I'm going to let this fail. And so I started my company, and by the way, like by the time I sold it, we had 90 million in revenue, but I started it with $3,000, which is like now I laugh, because I didn't know any better. That's how much money I had at that point. And what I did with the money, I got a little teeny tiny office in downtown Chicago, and I also made brochures. So then I realized after I made 20,000 brochures that I didn't have any money to mail them. And I was like, oh, what am I going to do with all these brochures? So one night, I talked a couple of my girlfriends into walking around Chicago, like in the Lincoln Park area and the Gold Coast area, like where people in their 20s and 30s and 40s lived, that were most likely, single and stuff. And I'm like, okay, so we're just going to walk up to brownstones and stuff and apartment buildings, and we're just going to put them under people's door. But as we're doing that, like almost like 5 minutes into it, I see the Chicago Tribune paperboy guy. And that's when people still got papers delivered to them, right? And he's like delivering the Sunday paper in this really nice, like plastic bag. And I said, hey, let's just follow him, and we're just going to put the brochure inside his plastic bag, and people will think, oh wow, this company has credibility and has money, they're advertising in the Chicago Tribune, right? So I didn't even think twice about like, oh, you know could they sue me? Well, I guess sue me, I don't have any money anyway. you um and that is how the very first person who called me was a PR person, and that was Sunday morning because I like hustled right back to the office, that morning after we were like out all night doing that. I'm like eating my bagel and I'm thinking, oh, so many people are going to be calling, Chicago's going to be so excited. What did I know? I was very positive. But the first person who called was a woman, and she was a PR person. She was around my age. And she said, listen, I love you. I love your idea. Why don't I do PR for you and you give me some free dates? And I was like, what's PR? We all know what PR is now, I mean, it's so ridiculous. So anyway, she ended up getting me like, a little thing in the Chicago Cranes, which is a little business magazine, and then Chicago Magazine picked it up. And from there, People Magazine picked it up, which was the big one that like, whoa, People Magazine came out and spent a day with me, and they followed a couple out to lunch and took photos and did like a 2-page article. And that really, really got the ball rolling because obviously I didn't have any money for advertising. And I just remember like all I could think about was, you know, how am I going to pay my rent for the space I have? How am I going to make it? And so this is probably like 2 months into it. Um, and I'm standing like at a grocery store in Chicago in line, and this girl taps me on the shoulder, and I'll never forget her name. And she wasn't a good friend of mine or anything. I just met her the previous week at a party, and her name's Cheryl Trieger. And she tapped me on the shoulder. She goes, "Hey, Andrea, I heard you doing this dating thing. How's it going?" And all that had been going through my brain at that moment in time was, I hope I don't go bankrupt. I hope I don't go bankrupt. But what I said to her was, "Oh my gosh, it's going great. You know what? This one couple I fixed up, Jack and Roberta, I think they're going to be my first marriage." And she goes, "Really?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm only 2 months into it. I think I'm going to have my first marriage." And she's like, "Oh, wow, that's cool." And, then we talked about something else. So later that day, I get a phone call and it's her. And she said, I don't know if you know this, but I'm a producer at CNN. And we were talking about you this afternoon in a meeting. Uh, and we'd like to film a date tomorrow and film a couple going out and interview you and run a story on you. And that really broke the glass ceiling for me right there. That and to me, that's always a lesson in, um no matter how much you might be freaking out in your head about your business, nobody wants to hear your problems ever. you know so had I said, "Oh, it's just getting started, it's slow, I'm just hoping we make it," believe me, I would not have gotten a call from CNN that afternoon, right? Um,
Mm-mm.
but I think it was just, I was always really positive, and I I was confident that if there was this service and somebody else had started it, I would join it in a heartbeat. So I was really confident in the company and what we were offering, and that this could be a way to really help people. And a year later, I borrowed a little money from my dad and my grandma, and I opened up the New York City office. And it kind of went from there. And it wasn't probably until I had 5 locations that we really started making some money, and I was able to pay myself. And by then I had a staff. I had a couple of people working for me, and yeah, that's how it all started.
Thank you for sharing because realistically, there's so many beautiful stories inside of that. Your energy, your focus, your detail, your persistence. Come on, being diligent about it. And I love what you said earlier. Like either I think someone said to you, I think it might have been your brother or brother-in-law. I'm say brother. The CFO said to you, "You're crazy for starting this." Your mother wasn't on board with it, but you you stay steady. And a lot of times we allow others to basically take us off what we should be staying on, and that's very beneficial. I love your energy. I love all of that. Thank you for coming by. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark. This is really fun, and you're a really good interviewer. So I really appreciate it.
No, thank you. We're gonna find a way to get you back here. We're gonna find a way. I don't know how yet, but we're gonna find a way to get you back here. It's the dating
Let me
expert.
know.
You got it. It's the dating expert, the dating coach, entrepreneur, and author, Andrea McGinty. Well, thank you for stopping by. Well, thank you for giving us a listen. We'll get back together real soon. You know, God loves you, and I love you too.